I'm watching this terrorist attack over in Paris and other places, and I'm looking at the citizens running and hiding and being attacked and killed and wounded, and I'm thinking, this is so sad. The folks in their own country have to hide and run from their enemies that the government brought in. And then the folks don't have guns. They don't have a way to protect themselves. You had 3 Muslims go into a bar or bars and attack people with knives, and they were hiding and running and afraid, where they could have just blown those people away before anyone was hurt, for the most part. And it breaks my heart to see it. So I have one of the smartest white men on this side of heaven back to help me understand this. Dr. John R Lott Jr. is back. He's a PhD economist and world-renowned expert on guns and crime. He is the founder of the Crime Prevention Research Center. He is the author of several books, including More Guns, Less Crime, back in 2010. His website is crimeresearch.org. All right. Dr. Lott, welcome back, sir.
Oh, great to talk to you again, Jesse.
Yeah, thank you for coming. You know, I'm watching all these things happen over in Paris, and the citizens are under run. And then I hear that they don't have guns, they have no way to protect themselves. As I thought of you, I got to talk to Dr. Lott about this, because I know you. If anyone understands what's going on and can explain it to us, it would be you. So I wanted to talk to you about terrorism and crime. We learned that 90% of police in the UK do not carry guns, and no citizens carry guns. How can that be? Is that true, first of all?
No, it's true. There seems to be a big desire to change at least some of the laws. There's Sky News just did a survey that had over 70% of British citizens wanting to have police be armed. And you can see the outcome of that. You look at Paris and the attacks that they've had there. The November 2015 attack that they had at the concert hall, there were actually 8 off-duty police officers who were there to attend the concert. But because of French law at the time, none of them were able to go and have a gun with them.
That's amazing.
One can only imagine how that tragedy might have been averted or turned out differently if some of those police officers had been able to carry. Fortunately, though it's too late, last June, France changed its law to allow off-duty police officers to carry. But in Britain, you still have the same policies that they've had before. Not only can't police carry off the job, but the vast majority of them don't carry on the job. And when crimes occur, when they run into criminals who do have guns, the natural reaction of most of the police is to run away, rather than the reaction of American police to go and run towards the attack. There was one notable difference in this attack over the weekend, and that is one police officer with his baton went in and tried to take on the 3 terrorists who were armed with these long knives. He was stabbed and seriously wounded, and my understanding is still in the hospital. But one can only imagine that if he had had a gun, that incident might have turned out differently. I mean, his bravery allowed some delay in the attack of the terrorists there, and may have saved some lives. But if he had had a gun, it probably would have been resolved much more easily, and they would have been more permanently delayed.
That's amazing. Let me ask: at one time, did the citizens, including the police department, were they able to carry guns at one point, and then somebody convinced them to lay them down?
Right. Well, Britain didn't really have any gun control laws until 1920. Prior to that time, gun ownership was extremely common in Britain. You can go and pick up newspapers from that period of time, like the London Sunday Times or other newspapers, and you'll see lots of ads for walking stick guns, briefcase guns, book guns. I mean, it wasn't just carrying regular guns that people had, but they would be advertised in various disguised ways. The amazing thing is that at that time, you take London, a city of 8.5 million people. There's a book by Joyce Lee Malcolm for Harvard University Press. She's a historian. And you'd find years there where 8.5 million people in London, gun ownership very common. You'd have 2 gun murders. You'd have 5 armed robberies in any given year. The reason why they moved to the strict gun control had nothing to do with crime. What it had to do with was you had just had the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. World War I had ended. There were a lot of unemployed former soldiers that were there in Britain, and the British government was afraid of having a Bolshevik-type revolution in the UK. And so what they did was make it difficult or very hard for relatively poor and even middle-income class people to be able to go and obtain guns. That was the original impetus for the original gun control that they had there. It had nothing to do with crime, and crime rates were unbelievably low before they had any gun control.
Amazing. And so I understand what you just said, but how is it that the government is able to convince a whole society to lay down their weapons, and then these kinds of things start happening, and the people still not fighting to get their weapons back? You know, if the people rise up and say, no, you brought our enemies into our country, they're killing us, we're going to take our guns back and do it now. What is wrong with the folks that they want? I saw in the London attack, I saw men cowering down and crawling around, ducking, hiding, running, getting stabbed, and none of them had weapons. Why don't they rise up right now and say no to the government? We're going to protect ourselves. They're not going to put everybody in jail.
Sure. Well, I mean, the problem that you have is they have convinced a lot of people that if you allow everyday individuals to have guns, there's going to be mayhem that's going to occur. You know, we have about over 15 million Americans that have permanent concealed handguns. If you were to go and just explain the experience that we've had with permanent concealed handguns in the United States to those in Britain, they wouldn't believe you because of what they've seen in the media. I mean, what you find in the United States is that permanent concealed handgun holders are incredibly law-abiding. They lose their permits for any type of firearms-related violation at thousands or tens of thousands of 1 percentage point. And even those are for usually relatively trivial reasons, like forgetting to have their permit with them when they're carrying or accidentally going into a gun-free zone. But, you know, look, we have violence in the United States. Over half the murders in the United States are in 2% of the counties. That's 60 counties out of 3,140 counties have over half the murders.
Wow.
And if you look at murders, any type of murder map for those counties, you're going to see that the murders are very heavily concentrated in 2 or 3 areas. But that's gang crime.
Yeah.
That's drug gang crime primarily. And so, you know, the problem that you have with these gun control laws is that who's most likely to obey them? When you pass them, it's the most law-abiding, good citizens who obey them, not the criminals. And the thing is, if you think that you're going to be any more successful in stopping these drug gangs from getting a hold of guns than you've been in stopping them from getting a hold of drugs, good luck.
Yeah.
I mean, I could click my fingers right now and cause all illegal drugs to disappear from the United States and all guns. How long do you think it would be before the illegal drugs started coming back into the United States? If you're in El Paso, 15, 20 minutes? And how long would it take before they'd be bringing in the guns that they need to protect that valuable property? They'd be doing that at the same time. You know, it's not like a drug gang can go to the police and say, look, this other gang stole our drugs. Can you help us get them back? These gangs have to have essentially militaries that they set up in order to protect that very valuable property. So the notion that somehow these drug gangs aren't still going to be able to go and get a hold of guns just as they get a hold of the illegal drugs to sell just simply isn't a serious response. I mean, I've been in Mexico recently testifying to the federal Senate there, and, you know, they understand they've essentially banned most people having guns, and yet drug gangs are awash with weapons that they have in the United States, automatic weapons, missile file launchers, you name it, what they have there. And so, but people in the UK just don't understand the distinction between criminals and law-abiding citizens, and how drug gangs in the UK, just as drug gangs in the United States, are going to be getting those weapons. And if you disarm law-abiding citizens relative to criminals, you actually will make it easier for criminals to commit the crime.
I'm Skyping with Dr. John R Lott Jr. He's a PhD, an economist and worldwide renowned expert on guns and crimes, and the founder of the Crime Prevention Research Center. He's also author of several books, including More Guns, Less Crimes. Makes sense to me. More Guns, Less Crime, he wrote back in 2010. Dr. Lott, you have a new book out, right?
I do. It's called The War on Guns. Basically looks at a lot of the debate that's been going on about guns over the last few years, everything from stand your ground laws to things like background checks on the private transfer of guns, to looking at mass public shootings around the world. So, for example, what you find is that mass public shootings are actually much more common in the rest of the world than they are in the United States. Even the European Union has a frequency per capita of mass public shootings that's almost identical to what we have here in the United States. And their casualty rate for mass public shootings during the Obama administration was actually 50% higher than the casualty rate that we've had for mass public shootings.
That's amazing. This is so common sense, but most people don't seem to operate from common sense, because if they did, then taking away of the guns would not be happening, period.
Right. Look, I understand where people come from on that issue. They see something bad that happens. They see it happens with a gun. And their reaction is, well, if I can only get rid of the gun, then bad things won't happen. What they miss out on, though, is all the times that people use guns defensively to prevent bad things from happening.
Yeah.
One of the things I have in the book on the war on guns is looking at places around the world that have banned guns. And what you find is that every single time that we have data, both before and after bans gone into effect, murder rates have gone up. There's not one time where murder rates even stay the same if you've had a ban on guns. And there's a simple reason for that, and that is, it applies to gun control laws generally, and that is, you have to ask yourself who's most likely to obey the laws.
Yeah.
And if you may reduce gun ownership by criminals a little bit, but if you primarily do it for law-abiding citizens, you make it easier for criminals to go and commit crime than it was before.
How can people get your new book, or any of your books, really?
Well, they go to places like Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com. The newest book's just been out for a little while, The War on Guns.
Yeah, we have a picture of it there. Over in the UK, in Paris, I believe, when they had this attack, it was 3 men, according to the report, who was driving a van, and they had knives. And so you take away all the people's guns, and then they come out with the enemy comes out with knives. Are you going to ban knives and vans as well?
Right. Look at France. They have very strict gun control laws. Semi-automatic guns are essentially banned for individuals. And yet they've had a number of mass public shootings that have involved machine guns, automatic weapons that are there, which are obviously completely illegal. They've had over 80 people killed in a truck attack that they had last year in Nice. But you look at just 2015, there are 4 terrorist attacks with guns in 2015 in France. The total number of casualties in that 1 year was 532. If you look at all the casualties from all the mass public shootings in the United States over all 8 years of the Obama presidency, you're at 527. Wow. So a country 1/5 the population of the United States in 1 year had more casualties in that 1 year, deaths and injuries, than the United States had over 8 years. It's not even close to being comparable. And if you compare the United States to other countries in Europe, you see similar types of patterns. The United States, in terms of frequency of mass public shootings, if you just compare us to only European countries, ranks 12th. And we rank 11th in terms of murders per capita from mass public shootings.
You noted Muslims were behind at least 80% of recent deadly bombing worldwide, each of which killed 4 or more in 2014 and 2015.
Right.
Is this going to get better or worse?
Well, look, I mean, obviously the huge vast majority of Muslims are very peaceful, very loving people.
How do we know this?
Well, but what we do know is that there is a small group of them, at least a small group, that commits a huge amount of violence. Whether you look at mass public shootings, you have 40 of the 50 worst mass public shootings since 1970 have been done by Muslims. You look at bombing attacks. Since there's so many more bombing attacks around the world, I've only gone back over a few years. But over that period of time, as you just mentioned, when you look at 4 more people killed in bombing, again, it's 80% of those attacks have, and it's probably more than that because 17% are unknown as to who perpetrated it. But even if you assume that Muslims didn't do any of that 17%, you're talking at least 80% of those bombings were due to Muslims, Muslim radicals. And you look at even vehicle attacks, you have about the same percentage there of radical Muslims engaging in those types of attacks. And so, you listen to Donald Trump go and talk about having a temporary restriction on travel from certain hotspots where that the Obama administration had identified. And you can understand why he has a concern to make sure that certain things are checked more carefully when it's difficult right now.
That's right.
When you don't have a fully functioning government in places like Syria or Libya to go and try to be more careful on checking.
That's a lot. We have about 2 minutes left here together. I noted that in Japan and Hungary and other areas, they don't allow Muslims to come in. And as a result, they're not having to deal with this. Should we stop these folks from coming into our country before it's too late?
Well, I don't think you have to stop all Muslims by any means, but the types of policies that President Trump has put forward in terms of more extreme vetting. I mean, the problem that you have from a country like Syria or Libya, for example, is there are no government records to go and obtain, to go and see whether or not what somebody's history is.
Yeah.
You can't even be sure about passports from those countries because ISIS has stolen the machines that make the passports in a place like Syria. So why not try to go and check just to be careful? I mean, you're talking about delays in somebody coming through. You're not talking about forbidding people from coming through, but they just want to be more careful. And I don't know, as we just went through the numbers, I don't know how you can deny the high rates that certain groups these radical Muslims go and commit these types of crimes.
Give me a short answer to an excellent question.
Okay.
Muslims don't assimilate when they go into these different countries. And there are other groups that don't assimilate either, but they don't go around killing people. They also support Sharia law in different countries. When they move in, most of the Muslims support Sharia law. Why do we think most, if not all, Muslims don't support what's happening?
Well, I mean, there are surveys. I suppose one has to depend upon whether or not these individuals are answering these surveys accurately. But surely the vast majority of Muslims in the United States don't support these types of terrorist attacks.
I got to go, sir. I'm going to have you back. I really appreciate you. You're a smart man. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right.